Nay. I hope everyone's having a wonderful evening. And today's video is kind of exciting because it is a video requested to me by one of my lovely patrons over at patreon.com. Link in the description below. If you want to help support the channel, I really appreciate it. But they donated at such a level to request a video from me, and this is it. And they were actually very generous and very open-ended with it, that they wanted a video on history or the liberal, liberal arts and stuff like in general. And you know what, I can work with that. I was an English major, which is very hand in hand with history because it's kind of just the history from very specific lens of the literature at the time. So yeah, I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna get back in this. Is definitely something I can work with. And yeah, so today I'm gonna actually be talking about more of an applied use of history and how I've used it, because I was an English major, in my writing. And specifically the game I've been working on, Librarian Adil, that I'm a lead developer of. If you haven't watched the other videos I've done on the game, it's a game about running a magical library, but we're not going to be really talking about the game that much. We're much more talking about the larger world building and backstory to the world of the game. And, I mean, honestly, if it was anything other than the library, I would not have done as much work on this as I have, but there's something about the fact that the game is focused on a place where you literally store knowledge, that we have to have knowledge stored in there. Like, most games and stuff don't need this level of in-depth world building and detailed history and stuff, because honestly it doesn't matter for the game. And anytime you spend on it, it's like fine if you want to, but it is not necessary. But because we wanted to have books that were more than like, this is a history book, this is a social sciences book, and we wanted to actually have like, this is the history of X such and such war or whatever, like things like that, and like actually having it all fit together in this tapestry of the world, we needed to have at least a framework for the different writers of the various parts of the thing to work off of, to like coordinate everything. Because I mean, a lot of my world building and the stuff I did was, it wasn't meant to be comprehensive, it was meant to be a framework for other people to come in and write off of, because writing everything is, well, impossible, and honestly not my job. I was just, because it was kind of one of those things where it's gotta get together so your other writers can coordinate and sync up. But to do this, I turned to the fancy other cool lore that I know a lot of, and that's called of the planet Earth. Fun fact, a lot of stuff has happened here, and you might have learned about it in school and other places. Definitely not a lot of just watching videos and reading about it in my free time for fun, because I'm not a giant nerd who just reads history books. I don't know what you're talking about. But that is it. It's super applicable and super useful to have that knowledge, because there are some people when like the writings and world buildings who are like, no, you shouldn't go to that because you want to find, like, start from a more blank slate. But knowledge of history and a mastery of history in a lot of cases is so useful for these sort of things for two key reasons. The first is you notice patterns and stuff, and history is full of stuff. Fun fact, a lot of stuff has happened over the course of the world, then stuff that isn't that well known that you can just steal, because who's gonna yell at you for that? If they notice, they're a nerd because they know that you were just kind of stealing the happenings of some fleet battle in like the year 400, like off the coast of Greece. Like, they're the nerd, not you. And also, all those people then were dead. They're not going to sue you. But also just kind of knowing those traits, and it's a really good insight into like realism and how people act, and also kind of just an insight of, you know what, realism is a joke, because let's be honest, a lot of weird stuff has happened, and you know what, all that stuff that about like trying to be unique and stuff is really a moot point, because it doesn't matter. But the more important reasons come to history is to especially, and this isn't quite as much like the in-depth stuff, but these large overarching things to mirror, because let's be honest, most of your players aren't going to read all of your detailed lore and won't know all the detailed histories of things, but it is easy you need to have, but if you have parallels to real life events and real history, it provides a place for them to kind of hook onto and latch onto, where yes, they may not know who, like, what the, like, Adwellan Empire, the Elwyn Empire was, but they do get the idea of, oh, there was, long time ago, there was this huge empire that spanned the world, and it fell, and people have been trying to emulate it ever since, to varying degrees of success, and calling himself the new Adwellan Empire, Emperor, and whatnot. You know what, that rings some bells of some things, and you get that, where it's like, you know what, that's very clearly an allegory for the Roman Empire. Not necessarily an allegory, because I'm not trying to have some commentary on the Roman Empire, but you know what I mean, where it's providing those parallels. And those parallels are super useful for, I don't know, filling in the blanks where the player doesn't know the knowledge that they can fill in enough and have it make enough sense. Like, for a lot of you don't need to put weird twists and subversions in the background. The background should blend into the background. Like, most of this I'm talking about is backdrop information that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the game. Like, if you dig into it, and if you're a nerd, and you really get into the lore of this game, I hope you enjoy it, but also you're a giant nerd and not the average player. But this is just gonna have that internal consistency, and honestly just for something in like world building and things in general, is that there is a huge benefit to players, and I'm this way too, where, because it's like I care about, for players who care about story, and not even the ones who don't dig super deep into the story, where it's like, I am not super into the Elder Scrolls lore, but I appreciate that it is deep, and knowing that there is a lot of background consistency, or their lack of, but like depth to it behind what I know, it adds to my enjoyment of what I do know, because it's like, no, if I wanted to dig deeper, I could. And there will be things where it's like, you want to have your lore be a few steps deeper than what your average enjoyer of your lore will actually dig to at least give the illusion of boundless depth. And that's not strictly true, but it does add a nice dynamic to the game, and something I've tried to strive for, just because it is a game about knowledge, and I want to make it clear that there is this thing here. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be having weird twists and stuff like that, or subversions of tropes and things like that, or historical patterns in your background, because it's supposed to be the background. It shouldn't be crying for attention. And to have that flow well, not seamlessly, but like, well, with your audience, connecting it to how they know the real world works, and has gone and patterns you see there, is very beneficial. But that's enough talking about abstracts. Let's talk about the actual, how did I go about this going? So, the first part is that we need, the most important, was, where are we at the beginning of the game? Kind of the premise of the game was this idea that it is, okay, you're in a small town that's far removed from any like large city centers, like you moved here from the cities or whatever, but it's very far removed, and we wanted it to be some era of upheaval, like around the Industrial Revolution or thereabouts. So we're thinking like 1700s, 1800s, like maybe pushing into like Regency era, but that kind of like, things are changing, like progress is going on. The Enlightenment has gone, well, not the Enlightenment with a capital E, but the like Enlightenment thought has continued, has come about, and it's this era of innovation, all this stuff, and rapid change. But we're a bit far removed from that, because we're in this, we're far away, And we're in just this small kind of sleepy town that it does feel the changes in it. Like, they do notice that, like, okay, these new innovations, and like there's all the people who have like all the youngins who have left for the big city to try to seek their fortunes, and all the rising things like that, and that's there. But generally it's a quieter place, and having that kind of busy, turbulent backdrop is kind of there. It's I mean, it's even a play off of the working name. It's just Librarian Dill, where it is that pun of the phrase agrarian dill. And so we're starting from this, like, you see, it's a lot of the same feel that we're trying to evoke from, you get like from like a lot of Miyazaki movies, where it's this pastoral. Yes, there is all the effects of industrialization and all this stuff going on in the background, but that is not where the focus is. Although that does have an influence on this thing, where there is this feeling that times are changing. It just hasn't quite completely reached here yet. So that's kind of where we're starting. And honestly, from there, the question to ask when you're trying to build a history is, how did we get there? And if you're just starting from there, you just gotta work backwards, and you're kind of gonna work backwards from there. But we actually have another solid point that we actually established very early on in the lore, that just as kind of the feel of this world, which is the idea that this is not the first time that this has happened. That all around this world are the ruins of this massive civilization who built massive structures. They built this planet was spanning a city across the equator of the entire globe that goes on for 400 miles across and is completely impassable now. But something happened. I mean, they used to be this great spacefaring civilization. Like, people know that they went to space. Something of the idea is that when building this history, this isn't necessarily the history as it happened. It is the history as historians from the game's present day see it. And that can have conflicting accounts. It can have skewed visions of things. And it's because we're not giving a factual wiki entry of this is exactly what happened in these books. These books are skewed by the perspectives of the people who view this information. And that's okay if they get things wrong, because, fun fact, historians get things wrong all the time. Even not historians, people's perceptions of things. Like, people's perceptions of, like, even people with as Eurocentric as our education system is in the US and stuff, people don't know European history, like, at all. Like, their knowledge of European history is like, okay, the Greeks were there, then the Romans came, they built the Roman Empire, it fell apart at some point, and all of a sudden we're at kings and knights and castles, and the church was bad, and, I don't know, was saying no to Galileo, and then, but then they saw the errors of the ways, and most people just skip over the entirety of the Reformation, because who cares about that? It's about religion. Who cares about religion? That isn't important in European history. And, oh, look, we discovered the Americas, and that's when America began, and that's all they know of US history. But, while that is not right, it is still important to keep in mind, because that is how the public can often perceive that, or it's like the public perceives, like, the Middle Ages as what they see, like, in Renaissance fairs. Is that how it actually was? For the most part, no, not at all. But that perception is important, and important to keep in mind, because that's how they might see things in that era. But I got off topic, as I normally do in these kind of rambly videos. But, so there was this huge, the Ilwen Empire. They rose, and then one day, this thing happened called the Last Day, what it came to be down to, which is, essentially, one thing happened. This whole, empire was, essentially, it was kind of a techno-magical, where it was mostly powered by, like, magic replicating the idea of science and stuff like that, but something happened, and all of a sudden, every bit of magic stopped working. Where either it just stopped working entirely, or it just stopped doing what it was intended to do. And it just caused instant, planet-wide chaos and a complete breakdown of society. Where, I mean, ships were falling out of the sky. One of the moons fell apart because it was so heavily mined that it was requiring, like, essentially magical supports to keep it together, and it fell apart. The entire band was most of this planet was the center of most of the farming was done off-world, that most of the population didn't have food all of a sudden, and even if they did, they didn't have the magical means to grow that food and a lot of the systems to do that. Most of the people were concentrated in this planet-spanning city, and they tried to leave, and most people died. So it just came to a situation where it's like over 99% of the people of the population died, and just complete societal breakdown. So we have two things here that happened that are this kind of starting position where we have a complete breakdown of society and honestly a reset of technology. Like, some things would have stayed, like general knowledge of like certain like things that don't rely on magic. So they had ideas for things like the wheel and like all the general stuff that you get to. But more complex technologies, like, they didn't know. And magic still was there, so they could rediscover how that worked, but they were starting from square one. But at the same time, that wasn't preserving knowledge of how things worked. That they didn't know how to work wasn't their first priority. Their survivors were just trying to survive. So you have a complete breakdown of society and a complete, utter loss of a lot of knowledge just in the span of a day. And over the next 100 years, that's kind of how it was. These few generations just trying to survive in this world that no longer works, and nothing works, and all the cities are abandoned, and people head away from the equator, and that's what's known as the dimmed days. So how do we get from there to now, which is this kind of this era of innovation and stuff like that? And a little bit later we found out that it's going to be about 900 years, so the year's 923 since last day, since that happened. So, how do we get there? What are some historical parallels? So, the Inland Empire was this giant planet-spanning empire that kind of unified the whole area. Also, I should say that most of the history that I draw from is European-centric history. This is not because because I did grow up in the US, and that's most places I was exposed to, but I was also an English major, and I in-depth studied specifically like a lot of English history, but also European history. So it's what I'm most familiar with, and kind of what the parallels most work with. It's not really going for a situation of a empire rising and falling, splitting apart, and unifying again and to fall apart, and switching what its name is every few hundred years. So I'm not using like Chinese history or anything else but back to the Inland Empire just kind of falling. You know what? That actually, in terms of a lot of people's perception of it, that is a pretty good parallel to the Roman Empire. Now, unlike how a lot of people perceive it, Rome wasn't built in a day, but also Rome did not fall in a day. Like, the barbarians, like, sacking Rome and causing the Western Roman Empire to collapse, that wasn't just, oh, suddenly there's no Rome. Rome's influence had been waning for a long time, and it wasn't this instant thing. And also, it's like the Eastern Roman Empire was still there until, like, well into the 1400s. Like, it was a while before all that happened. So, but in this situation, it did. And it's fine that it did, and there was instant chaos and stuff, and the change from the Roman Empire falling to, the parallels, like, are not exact, but the main thing that we're getting from there to get that parallel is the idea that there was an empire, it fell, it doesn't really exist in any form, which is also not a parallel, because there's no Byzantine Ilwen Empire or whatever. So it isn't exactly a parallel, but it is enough that people can see the pick up on the parallel there. So you have the dim days, which, I mean, with the name you might parallel like, oh, that must be like the Dark Ages, but really the dim days doesn't have a real good parallel, because as far as we're aware, there hasn't been a situation like the dim days in human history, just because we haven't had a thing where overnight all of our technology stopped working. Would it cause wide panic and stuff like that and kind of bad stuff to happen? Yes, but it hasn't happened, but essentially it's kind of there to explain why things kind of regress so much, because kind of the idea is also, it's like, think about things like societal progress, social change and stuff like that. That wouldn't necessarily go away overnight, and kind of the idea that this prolonged struggle for survival is kind of what resets some of those things, where when you're looking at things like the Ilwen Empire was actually like very progressive when you look at things like, things like gender equality and things like that, and the sudden switch to that kind of other things like that kind of not reverted, but arose. Because it's like, I mean, certain things like gender equality and stuff like that isn't a natural part of human, that isn't intrinsic to humans. It has arisen a fair bit, but it is not universal by any means, to not say that it's like, oh, reverted back to its natural state. But the idea is that that's kind of, things arose in that way. Also in the sex gender equality I'm getting into there, not to get into this, gender doesn't work the same in this world. Essentially it's a trinary gender system, but I'm not getting into that on this episode of a thing that isn't actually episodic. This is a one-off video. I guess it's an episode if you consider like every video I do in Librarian Idyll as like an episode, but whatever. But after that, people kind of settle down and kind of start reforming into smaller things away from the band, that city that was there, because the band now was completely uninhabitable in most cities, because just various things happened. Like, there was a lot of magic there, and the magic that just changed what it did made it really weird and also kind of dangerous. The main power network for the entire band, it went from providing power and like heat and stuff to all the houses there, to its new function, which is breaking time, which isn't good for a living situation, where even crossing the band is almost impossible, because this thing is massive. It is a geological feature unlike any other on the planet. But so essentially you have these places that are like, people move south to the land and north, so you don't really hear about the people from north of the band, because no one hears them, because you can't cross the band. But this game focuses on, and the history that we're looking at is this area called Cordwell, the coasts of Cordwell. It's two coasts situated around the Cordwell Sea, and yeah. So so after that, now we're getting back into the post kind of fall of the Roman Empire era, where you have the rise of kind of this pseudo-medieval style era, where people are yes, a lot of knowledge has been forgotten. That's another thing where it's like, people talk about like the Dark Ages and stuff, like, oh, all this knowledge was forgotten, and oh, they were so ignorant and didn't know everything, but that's not actually what happened, like, at all. Like, that's just gross overgeneralization of what happened then. But that's beside the point. But these people did kind of forget everything, like at least everything that like was technologically related. But Yeah, but you get kind of this era of, it's referred to as the days of Urwa. Urwa being the god of life who, it was like the idea is that like, oh, Eldwa, the god of death, was like, caused the last day to destroy this world, but Urwa swept in and it was the popular mythology then, like, saved this world, and now we are flourishing under the guidance of Urwa. And that was the idea that this era of rebirth, but not in the era of like rebirth as in the word Renaissance, because that's a different thing entirely. But at least from the perspective of like modern people looking back at the days of Urwa, it is that very romanticized vision of this era, where it was the knights and kingdoms, and really how it's depicted in the game and from scholars in this current era is this very rose-tinted, oh, it was the day of like heroes and kings and stuff like that, like the tales of like King Dward and the Seven, which is kind of this Arthurian archetype figure and things like that. And they look back at that, and that is clearly not how it actually was during this time, but it is the perception of it in this time, and that is kind of the focus of that, where was it this way? It was, and it's like, also looking back on it, it was very homogenized, where everyone looks back, it's like, oh yes, the days of Urwa, everyone acted the same the entire way through. And kind of the perception of that, it's like, yes, they were having the same thing, you know, with all the knights of the colorful standards and tabards and going around saving princesses. That happened that entire 400-year span of time, obviously. Nothing changes in 400 years. Nothing. And while that's obviously not true, it's important that to note in the world-building history that that is how people view that time period. Like, yes, the dedicated scholars will know better in some ways to generalize it like that. For the most part, that's how it's seen. And for the aspects of the game and what matters, that's kind of how it was. Because, I mean, with histories and stories and stuff, how it is remembered is almost more important than how it was. And depending on how you're using that information, but especially for something like this and that depiction, that's what's important. So the days of Urwa, but one thing you actually see that, because I've been talking about like the political landscape, that how do we get from there to what we have right now, which is this actual kind of this boom of industry, and the kind of that critical point when it's like, okay, technology is really getting on a roll now, where after like hundreds of years of relative stagnation, that's how words work. After all that time of stagnation, all of a sudden things are really picking up speed in terms of progress and whatnot on the technological side of things, and also social side of things. How do we get from this era of knights and kings and stuff to where we are today? But one thing, we've been talking about the political side of things and kind of the societal thing type of things, but one thing to actually also look at is like, what is their art like? And I'm not going to go through into all this because that could be there forever, but I've gone through and also like labeled all the different artistic movements in these times, and even for different things, because it's like, there aren't necessarily, yeah, there are some general artistic movements through the eras, but they're not all the same for every art discipline. Like, your visual art disciplines might have to be different from your architectural eras, which might be different from your writing eras and things like that, but they'll generally have common themes throughout them. And what you actually see towards the end of the days of Urwa and Cordwell is the early Ilwyn Renaissance, which is it's called early reminiscentism, where it was this growing feeling of looking at all these ruins who are now removed like several hundred years and seeing like, our ancestors built these great cities and stuff, and there's tales that they flew among the stars and all that, and could that be possible, and how can we get back there? And there was this growing amount of like revitalization and things like that. And let's get back there. And that would have been great. And honestly, we could have just let that bread into, like, that led into that. But, you know, that was a bit too smooth sailing for me. So I threw something in. It's not going to be reading from you. I'm an expert of reading from the actual book itself. So, this happens in the year 563. This is the book labeled The Words of the Penitent, which is put under Tell 2.15 Manifestations of Urin. It is written by Quinn the Penitent, and it is his account of the god Celtheus, the god of nature. The Ilwyn Empire was founded by the god Ilwa, or the manifestation Aidwell Ilwa. The gods can kind of come onto people and like act as their avatars throughout their life, or they'll sometimes come in someone's dying moments to deliver a prophecy or something. But this person, Quinn, claims to have been visited through his dying father by Celtheus, and this is his account. I write this now, as the words may not be faded from my memory or warped from telling to telling in the coming weeks, as I declare and spread the words of our God and Protector, as revealed through the dying words of my dearly beloved father. Past year, in the harvest time, my father Dredden grew gravely ill with a hellish fever and frequent unwakeable slumber, accented with bouts of waking from with a mind of melancholy and woe. This disheartened my feather and my brother dearly, myself as well, as he had been our source of strength and stability in these troubled times, and Garin, our youngest brother, was in his 9th year and was about to descend to the age of Far, and was gravely distraught when father would not wake for the ceremony. Ours was a family of Chandlers, and had many friends of the faith, and were able to procure the attention of a priest of Ilwan, a devotee of Udwa, who came to attend to father while myself and my brothers and Thrin were busy with the feast of Eldwa and the coming winter time. They attended to my father along with our friend Halthin, who was passing the dimmer side of the year in Twayon, having come from her family's estate in a week's ride east, near Madwith. They were the last to see father in such a waking state until the coming events, and they can attest to his feverish and dire condition he slipped into on the eve of Eldwa. Eldwa passed into Urin's winter, and when Far came about in short order, all the while father slept in an uneasy, deep slumber, already cradled in Drek's embrace, only barely still in our sights. Garin, God bless the boy, so dutifully and lovingly attended to father all this time, pausing studies with our Thrin's cousin across the city to care for him. It was all we could do to watch father grow all the more frail. He was never a large man, and sickly in his slumber, fearing in our hearts, yet never muttering, that he would never wake again. In the height of spring, father began to stir one morning. Garin near about ran half the length of Twayon to where I and our brothers were administering to in exchange for the fresh tallows of springtime, whereupon breathlessly finding us, he voicelessly urged us back home to father. When I arrived at his bedside, father was muttering, half awoken from his slumber, incomprehensible things in a tongue none of us the assembled understood. From his rambling we discerned a single word, Garthwen, the Grove of the Fairer. There was an eagerness and need in father's voice about that name, so we agreed at once to begin plans. The road to Garthwen was no short journey. My brother stayed behind to mind the family in the house, so I made the preparations of Berrig, a friend of father's, and Halthin. Our cousin Den also made plans to journey, but an errand called him away before our departure and was unable to join our pilgrimage. The Feather forbade us move father in such a state, but they were not there to see the urgency in father's heart and words, so we struck out on our journey under the cover of night and away from their eyes. Travelling with father was no easy task, having returned to his slumber and requiring near constant care. Beric procured a carriage and a couple fair horses from his brother to ferry us for us to ferry father to our destination north. We arrived at the eve of summer. On the feast of Calain have already passed on the road. Beric had once been to this place, however, I had never been afforded the opportunity until now. Garthwin was in full bloom at this time of year. The trees were breathing and alive, the statue of the king under the leaves standing proud in a clearing, surrounded by a bed of pale tulips. We laid father in a bed of grasses at Saltheus' feet, still deep in worrisome slumber. His fever had risen since taking him from the carriage, a fair distance away now, and we forgot to bring water with us due to the clearing, so Halfdan stayed behind to attend to father while we went to fetch our supplies we left behind in haste and eagerness. Upon our return, Halfdan was not in sight. The ancient statue whose gaze we left our father in had vanished. Upon its base sat father, fully awake, breathing and gazing. The markings of his ailment cleansed as quickly as washing dirt from one's cheek. But there was more to him. Father was not alone behind those eyes. An aura of pleasant early summer mist surrounded his gentle form, and the tulips at his feet seemed to turn and bow before him. The trees above bent and curled, forming a crown above his head. He smiled to me as a father, but then stood and spoke to me as far more. When Belenur restored this world anew, restored the song ancient tongues led astray, gave hope to sunrise and to a new day, but that discord survived and in time grew, that Eldwelyn choir, a song most discordant. That world perished and crumbled into dust, yet a Dwellin folly has still remained, leading to endings Eldwa left unclaimed. A return to oldest ways you must trust, and hope the Lord of Leaves finds you all penitent. With a final sigh from his mouth and a sigh of wind through the trees of Garthwain, the presence within my father left. The tulips returned to their indifferent ways, the trees unbowed, and like a wave the years and sickliness of my father rushed back into his face and limbs. I rushed to my father's side as he fell under his weight, and felt his last breath escape. Thus is my tale, and what has been revealed to me. The path forward is on our shoulders, and I will do what I must to heed the words of warning given through my beloved father's voice. It is my hope that this shall be the first step towards the salvation of all. So, with Quinn spread this word throughout Eastern Cordwell. And it is specifically unclear whether this was actually factual, and it is kind of like, there is debate in the scholar community, like, was this an actual manifestation of Saltheus? But that's a moot point, because a lot of people believed him. And that's how the Penitent of All became formed. He became Quinn the Penitent, and quickly centralized power in Eastern Cordwell, quickly expanding, and over the course of the next few hundred years, conquered all of Cordwell. The Penitent, guided by this, were very anti-Ilwyn, as people had started to look on these Ilwyn ruins with wonder and awe, the Penitent was like, no, these are the ruins of folly. It is their hubris and their indifference to the oldest ways, which it refers to, that caused the last day to happen, that the last day was restoring balance to the world. And not only that, we are headed back in that direction, so we need to go back. So for the next few hundred years, this region becomes under the control of this reactionary group called the Penitent of All, who are very much, they reject a lot of the Adwell being the Ilwyn ways, a lot of traditions that stem from old Ilwyn traditions. They were like, no, we can't do this, we gotta go back to oldest ways. The thing is, they don't actually know that much about the oldest ways, so they kind of make a lot of it up. But generally, it's this very different culture, and in Eastern Cornwall, this is very much, it's very ingrained, these penitent things going on. Western Cornwall, where the actual game takes place, was never fully conquered by the penitent, but they were very much they did lose a series of wars and became essentially just kind of, their governments were kind of, their top level governments were replaced with penitent pawns. So while a lot of the cultural stuff didn't happen, a lot of the overall like rule stuff did happen. But a lot of the cultural changes and a lot of that rejection of Ilwa and the Ilwyn Empire and that legacy never really implanted as much. But a lot of that, it did very much stall that movement of wonder and like we need to reach for the stars again. So there's this bump in the road and it happens for 200 years, and this is to also parallel. This is to add some drama and actually add some variation to that. But coming back to history, this is to parallel actually something that a lot of people perceive in history and people know of, where it's kind of like, how do we have this like very much the pushback from religious authorities towards like the march of progress, and like kind of how you get with like the Catholic Church and Galileo and all this other stuff, and kind of giving that parallel, and this idea that this old, because it's, this world doesn't really have the religious tensions that the real world has, like the faith of the 5 and the 10, apart from like smaller sects and very rare groups, for the most part, the different sections of the faith of the 5 and the 10, they were fine with each other. Like, at most you'd be like, okay, you emphasize different gods, but we still believe in all the same gods because they literally came to us thousands of years ago and taught us this, and they do come occasionally to us and like speak to us and actually do divine works and stuff on a not infrequent basis in history. So there's not much tension on whether they exist or not, because they exist and it's just kind of practice. And yeah, you'll get the holy war over like, you know what, now you're worshipping as heresy, but overall religious tensions are not at the levels they are in the real world. But I wanted to actually have that tension there, so I had to kind of make a faction that did care about this, that this one was very much like, no, the god that most of your churches actually revere above all else, Ilwa, the god of civilization, they caused this destruction, and having that pushback. But also that worship is also kind of like how that resolved, where the penitent fell, and the idea is several hundred years later, a little bit after they incorporated Dwellend, which is where the game takes place. They wanted to be like, okay, well, they wanted to incorporate it fully into the penitent fall, and they're like, okay, stop worshipping Ilwa, like actually stop it. So we're going like full Skyrim, like Talos worship is outlawed, but it's Ilwa, well, not outlawed, but very much refrained, where you cannot worship Ilwa in the same way that you did. You must worship Ilwa as a cautionary tale, not as a thing to be aspired to. And the capital of Dwellend, Leon, is the apocryphal birthplace of Adwell Ilwa, and there's a giant temple there which has the throne of Ilwa and all this other stuff, and the penitent burned that temple and was like, stop worshipping Ilwa, and specifically stop worshipping Adwell, the manifestation of Ilwa. And they were like, oh no, huge citywide riots which erupted into honestly just kind of the thing that started, like, it was, people like to, like, the history will often like depict this as like, yes, they tried to burn the Temple of Ilwa, and that is what single-handedly caused the people to be like, oh, we need to fight against the penitent. But in actuality, like, anti-penitent sentiment had been there for years, and you know what, there actually was a resistance movement ready to go and kind of rise, and they used it as opportunity. But going back to the theme of like how do people view this, they will view as then like there was the Penitent Civil War where the Dwellin Caprisid, the Cordwell Isles and Centil, well, essentially the Western Cordwell rose up against the Penitent, but they will point to be like, yes, that's all because the Penitent of all burned the Temple of Ilwa, even though even if they didn't do that, that would probably have happened at some point. The Penitent had overextended themselves, and after the Western Cordwell broke free, the Penitent lost a lot of their perceived authority, where they weren't as strong as people thought they were, and this crushing defeat, they essentially lost like half of their holdings, kind of caused the rest of them just kind of collapsing on themselves. And that's when you reach kind of the beginning of the modern day. That was about 150 years ago that the Penitent Civil War happened. And that is the thing that has set off this new era of innovation. Because not only is it like, was it the like, oh look, these people of our past, we see what they were able to accomplish, but it's like, hey, these guys are really cool, the people of the past won't reach for the stars. And now we really want to do that because these guys said we couldn't. And now we're going to do it. And that has really kind of pushed forward this era of like innovation, things like that. But also at the same time, if you look at history and things that were happening in the 17th and 19th centuries, in regards to kind of European coded powers and the rest of the world, you know what? You get excited. You're like, oh look, it's the birth of technology and all that. That you get really excited and you forget to not do colonialism. Because Eastern Cordwell just shattered, kind of. Like, this centralized power kind of just voided, like, kind of the Council of the Penitent was kind of fell apart very quickly. That quickly, like, there's now all these Western Cordwell powers who are very, like, unified, and, like, there's a lot of nationalistic fervor and all that going on, and they're like, yes, it's, these guys picked on us for years, let's start carving them up, and that's what they've been doing. Like, it's not done, but they've begun just, essentially, Eastern Cordwell is being carved up by these other powers, mostly Dwellin and Centil, and also they're starting to, like, look at lands beyond Cordwell and be like, okay, how do we expand this? Because, then coming back to another topic from history is the idea that we have this Roman Empire allegory, and it's not just the fall that is important. Arguably one of the most important things that the Roman Empire did in history is all the different attempts to recreate the Roman Empire. Where you had the Holy Roman Empire, you had and even into, like, all these other, like, large nations, all kind of being like, yes, whenever, like, any European, like, empire reached critical mass, they were like, at some point someone was going to say at some point, like, we are the successor to the Roman Empire. And that's happening again. And I mean, it happens throughout the days of Udwa and all that. And obviously the Penitent of all never claimed to be the successors to the Ilwan Empire because they were very much in the situation of we are not the Ilwan Empire. But that's an exception. But now Dwellin, a lot of the rhetoric is we are the successor of the Ilwan Empire. We hold the seat of Ilwa. We have cast off the chains of the Penitent, and it is now time for us to take the place. Even though we're this tiny city, this tiny, like, kind of kingdom in a small region of the world, we are the successors to this planet spanning, like, honestly, like, multiple star system planet spanning empire. And that weaves very much into their worldview and how they view themselves and their neighbors. There's this constant, like, there's just this assumption that in people of and Dwellin that Centil, their allies, they'll incorporate themselves into Dwellin soon. Because, I mean, obviously, we're the success. We being the people of Dwellin and in the capital of Leon, the historic home of they dwell, we're the successor state. okay, I get you're trying to do that, and we're like working on cleaning up some stuff, but you're joining us, right? And Centille's like very much is aware of this, and they're just like, they are friendly on paper, but there's alliance on the that there is no outright hostilities among the powers in the Western Cordwell, but there is that tension of like, who is going to be the successor state in this area, and there is these growing tensions, and kind of just having these parallels to these every empire trying to rebuild the Roman Empire, and kind of that parallel, and yeah, and that kind of brings us into current day and kind of that political situation, and kind of walks us from the world essentially ended to modern day of this. And like, yeah, all of this information is in the background, but it doesn't really matter for the story. We could tell the story without talking about it. This is a story about you are a library wizard who moves to a small town and builds a library there. That's what the story's about. We don't need to talk, like, this isn't a story about, like, these people are doing imperialism and, like, carving up Eastern Cordwell. But it does influence kind of a lot of how the writings are done, and how how the author of one book from Centille will be different if it's written by someone in Twillend, and how that affects and how they view the mythical like days of Utwa. And I mean, there are also eras that like scholars are aware of before the last day, like, because like there's the Eltwell time, like but that's very generic, where it's like there was the Twillend Empire. Before that there was pre-Twillend times. There was an ice age that we're aware of that Bellinera was in. Then there was, before that, there was what is generally known as antiquity. We don't know much about that. And then there's the mythic past. That's when like all the gods were walking along every Tuesday and hanging out and teaching us about this stuff. But who knows if what even happened? That's all just really old mythology. And but having that perception and that perspective, but also giving that grounding point where like making sure that all of these eras and these kind of motifs are familiar to people who don't even know history that well, and can kind of like be like, you know what, that makes sense, like that connects to things I know about history, and while still having that unique spin, that unique flavor that fits the world. And this is where I put a conclusion, but I don't have one because this has just been a ramble, because that's what I do on this channel. It's about educational rambles, although I'm not really sure what I taught you besides a bunch of lore that you might care about. I don't know. I'm excited for this game, even though all this, if you're looking for a lot of this in the game, don't, because this isn't what the game's about. I mean, if you want to just like read books in the library and just read all the books you collect and read all like the descriptions and stuff, I mean, I've been writing a lot of them. You can find all this information in game for the most part. Check out the link to the Twitter if you want updates on it. Well, yeah. I'm gonna close it here because I've been going for almost an hour. But, yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I don't even know. I'm trying to think of, like, I don't know. If you're interested in the project, let me know. Ask around on the Discord, like, if you want to help out in any way. I mean, let me know. Pop into the Discord and just, like, be like, hey, Lily, this sounds cool. Like, do you want some help with anything? I don't know. I'm just feeling at closing this. Thank you so much to all my patrons on Patreon, and specifically you, unnamed patron, who I didn't ask if you wanted to be named, so I'm just going to play it safe and not name you. If you do, I can put your name in the description if you want. But yeah, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. Hope everyone's staying safe. I think I'm finally past this cough, so I should see these videos again. Maybe you'll have a wonderful night. You all have wonderful dreams. And as always, may your story smile upon you.